Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a mathematical concept that's going to completely redefine how you look at the timeline of building wealth. We're talking directly about the grueling, exhausting, and let's be totally honest, kind of unglamorous journey of hitting that very first major financial milestone, saving your first $100,000, right? This is that era of your life marked by hardcore budgeting, maybe driving that clunker a few years longer than you'd really like, and definitely skipping those overpriced $7 lattes. If you're focused on building $1 million net worth, you already know getting off the starting line is the absolute toughest part. But the actual math behind how this timeline unfolds, it's going to completely flip the script on how you view your progress. Let's get right into the numbers.
Okay, let's dive into this. When we think about reaching $1 million, human nature basically wires us to think in strict linear terms. You look at your first $100,000 and logically you make an assumption based on simple arithmetic. 100 grand is exactly 10% of $1 million. So it totally stands to reason that when you hit that six-figure mark, you might feel this overwhelming wave of frustration. You might check your accounts after years of relentless saving and think, wow, no way. I've worked this hard, sacrificed this much, skipped all those vacations, and I'm literally only 1/10 of the way there. It feels like you've got this massive, insurmountable mountain left to climb. And I mean, purely in terms of raw dollars, you're absolutely correct.
But here's where we need to completely shatter that illusion. Because while simple math tells you you're only 10% of the way there, the mechanics of compound interest tell a radically different story. When you actually factor in how money grows exponentially over time, accumulating that first $100,000, it actually means you are a full 1/3 of the way through your total journey to $1 million. Just let that sink in for a second. You aren't 10% of the way there in terms of time and effort. You are 33% of the way there. There is this massive, beautiful disconnect between the raw dollar amount and the actual timeline, and it works entirely to your advantage. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is just how shocking this reality is when you map out the total time required to reach $1 million. Look at that. A massive 33.3% of your timeline is consumed by making just that first 10% of the money. It takes up a disproportionately huge chunk of the clock. It requires the most scraping, the tightest margins, and just the most sheer willpower. You're effectively pushing this giant boulder up a very, very steep hill, and it demands a massive temporal footprint. But why exactly does this happen? Why does a mere 10% of the money take up a full third of the timeline? Well, the answer is the absolute hero of our story, compound interest. Think of this as the mathematical engine that allows your money to do the heavy lifting later in your wealth journey. Honestly, it's best to imagine compound interest as this tireless, incredibly efficient employee that you've been slowly training. While you're grinding from 0 to 100 grand, you're doing all the heavy lifting yourself. Every single dollar is a direct product of your labor, your sweat, your discipline. But right around that six-figure mark, that's when this tireless employee finally clocks in for their shift. Your money is now generating enough of its own money that it starts to physically lift the burden of wealth creation directly off your shoulders.
And this brilliantly illustrates the ultimate mind-bending payoff of getting that engine running. According to the source data, the journey from 0 to $100,000 often takes the exact same amount of time as the journey from $100,000 all the way to $1 million. Think about that for a second. That is an absolute paradigm shift. Generating the final 90% of your wealth takes the exact same amount of time as generating the first 10%. All those years you spent agonizing over the first 100 grand, that same exact duration is going to carry you through the remaining 900 grand.
Because your money does the heavy lifting later in the journey. That's the secret. Once you crest that hill, everything changes. The momentum completely shifts. You're no longer pushing that boulder up the mountain, you're chasing it as it rapidly rolls down the other side. It's gathering speed, it's gathering mass, compounding exponentially. Your daily habits haven't necessarily changed. You might still be drinking that cheap coffee at home, but the math has completely taken over. You are breezing through milestones now. 200K, 400K, 800K, they fly by faster and faster because your money is working around the clock 24/7, out-earning your physical labor. So the crucial point is this: do not let the early grind discourage you. Reaching six figures is unequivocally the hardest part of the entire process. It tests your patience, it tests your relationships, and it absolutely tests your financial discipline. But once you cross that line, the foundation is permanently built. The structural integrity of your wealth is firmly in place. From that moment forward, the journey accelerates dramatically. By surviving those grueling early stages and ignoring the illusion that you're only 10% done, you are actively guaranteeing a dramatically accelerated high-speed path to your ultimate financial goal. Which leaves us with this final provocative thought. If the math proves that reaching six figures is truly the hardest part, the ultimate ordeal before the massive payoff, how aggressively will you push to build your foundation right now? Knowing that compound interest is just waiting in the wings to trigger your million-dollar acceleration, what sacrifices are you willing to make today to get that tireless engine working for you tomorrow? The finish line is mathematically so much closer than it appears. Keep pushing.